तू खाली मेरे को टेक्स्ट डालते रहियो दैट क्या कहते हैं.
Is it showing started streaming? Because it literally just started right now for me on the YouTube studio. Yeah,
It started. Then can you start streaming now?
it's going on. It's going on.
तू
Wait,
खाली मेरे को स्टार्ट हो गया
हाँ
चेक कर
हाँ हाँ चल रहा है.
going started streaming.
Using internet for transacting products and services, combined with great time for tech ecosystem in terms of funding, in terms of IPO markets, in terms of the number of unicorns getting created. Net this we strongly think it is a great time for youngsters thinking of starting tech enabled businesses across sectors in India. Probably this is once in a lifetime opportunity, and with your age, probably there's a really lucky time to be. If you have any interest to start a business, probably you wouldn't find a geography or a time, even in India's history, this is probably the best time for someone of your age to start tech enabled businesses across sectors, not just one or two sectors. uh, so finally, I will conclude saying that talking a little bit about Westbridge. Westbridge can really support your journey. We are amongst the largest India-focused funds. Today, we have an AUM of around $8 billion invested in India. Our team has an experience of investing in over 200 plus companies, and we have taken over 20 plus companies public. Again, probably amongst the highest compared to any other fund in India. And we invest across sectors, across fintech, consumer, SaaS, tech. We invest across tech businesses. We are really excited about the tech opportunity for the next coming decades in India. So we are focusing most of our, pretty much all our energies on younger tech companies. We have a fund life which is an evergreen fund. So technically we can invest in companies with a very long holding period, which is north of 10, 15, 20 years. So we generally tend to think in line with the founders and very aligned to build a long term sustainable business instead of short term returns. That gives us a lot of flexibility. And given the fund size, we can also support companies in the following rounds, not just one round. Typically, we start with, say, a 10, 15, 20 to $100 million check. That would be our first check we usually write at Series B, C, or even at Series A. And there are companies where we have invested few hundreds of millions of dollars as well. To give you an example, the highest amount we have invested in a single company is $600 million. So we can support company in multiple rounds in future. And with our experience of having invested in several companies and taking public, it can be of great help and complement founders' strengths as well. And we've been increasingly focusing a lot on early stage founders. So I would conclude saying that it's a great time to start up. And if you are looking for funding, I think Westbridge can really support your journey with its unique ability, being one of the largest funds, having an evergreen fund structure, and having a deep expertise in investing in 200 plus companies till date across sectors. So with this, I'll stop. Once again, it's a pleasure to attend Conquest and to share my thoughts with you. Happy to answer if you have any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Deepak. That was a really illuminating address, and we are sure everyone in the audience derived great value from it.
Thank you, Mala. Pleasure to attend. Thank you.
at Polygon, a startup enabling developers to scale Ethereum dApps in the nascent stage without compromising on security. All right, I think we'd like to begin again. All right, welcome everyone. We'd now like to introduce our first panel for this evening.
Owing to the creation of several new startups in the Web3 space, this panel aims to demystify Web3 and examine its potential for the next billion users.
The panelists for this event shall be Mr. Sandeep Neilwal, the co-founder at Polygon, a startup enabling developers to scale Ethereum dApps in the nascent stage without compromising on security.
Next up, we have Mr. Akshay Bedi, the co-founder of Superteam DAO, a collective devoted to backing projects in the Solana ecosystem and helping them launch and grow.
Mr. Tanay Pratap, the founder and CTO at Impact Metaversity, shall be our next guest, whose company is committed to providing virtually immersive learning experiences at reasonable and affordable costs.
And last but definitely not the least, we have Mr. Vijay Kalangi, the co-founder of SoulRaiser, a crypto startup with plans to build the first ever developer ecosystem around the Solana blockchain. I'd now like to call upon Mr. Vijay Kalangi to initiate this panel discussion.
Hi everyone, now that our panelists and our audience has joined in, we'd like to introduce the panel for this evening.
Owing to the creation of so many new startups in the Web3 space, this panel aims to demystify Web3 and examine its potential for the next billion users.
Our very first panelist on this list is Mr. Sandeep Neilwal, who is the co-founder at Polygon, a startup enabling developers to scale Ethereum dApps in the nascent stage without compromising on security.
Next up, we have Mr. Akshay Bedi, the co-founder of Superteam DAO, a collective devoted to backing projects in the Solana ecosystem and helping them launch and grow.
Mr. Tanay Pratap, the founder and CTO at Impact Metaversity, shall be our next guest, whose company is committed to providing virtually immersive learning experiences at reasonable and affordable costs.
And last, but definitely not the least, we have Mr. Vijay Kalangi, the co-founder of SoulRaiser, a crypto startup with plans to build the first ever developer ecosystem around the Solana blockchain. I'd now like to call upon Mr. Vijay Kalangi to initiate this panel discussion.
Thank you. Thanks. Thanks, everyone. Hi, Akshay. Hi, Tanay. Hi. Hi. Hi, everyone. Hi, Sandeep. How are you doing? Thanks for joining this panel today. So I'm Vijay. I am co-founder of this company called SoulRaiser. We're building on Solana, and we have a host of products. One such product is a launchpad, and we also have developer tools, etc. Glad to have all of you on board here. So I'll try and ask as many questions as I can and try to learn from you. So I'm going to play dumb. Maybe I really am dumb. So I'm going to ask as many questions as possible and hope the audience is going to learn from this discussion. So thank you. And so the way I plan to do this is ask some of the questions which are probably for all three of you, and some maybe I'll take your names and then you could possibly answer those questions. And some questions open for everybody. We can pick and answer. Great. So we'll first probably start with this question around maybe with Sandeep, right? So Sandeep, you're an inspiration. So you've put the India on this global map of entrepreneurs, including us, right? So when we're building SoulRaiser, we frequently in intense brainstorming sessions always think about kind of work that Polygon has done, and they've been edged on building starting 2017. A lot of ups and downs, but then so much innovation happening, right? So thank you so much again. So the thing that I would like to explore today is your own journey, right? How did you get into crypto or Web3, and if you can specifically focus on some of the inflection points in your journey, right? I think that'll be very interesting for the audience to know.
Absolutely, yeah. So before coming into crypto, like I had a brief, like I had a startup in the B2B space, tech startup, and it was doing well, but it was not scaling as per my liking, right? So I wanted to go into the deep tech space and started learning about a bit of AI, and then stumbled onto blockchain. Like I was exploring multiple technologies, and I had a brief brush with Bitcoin in 2013, and around this time I saw that Bitcoin was again getting momentum in 2000, I think 15 end or something, right? So I started reading more about it, and the good thing that happened with me, that once I read more about Bitcoin, and I think that was the most powerful thing that happened to me, which helped me to go all in into the space, is that when I read about Bitcoin, I did not think of it as a currency part. Actually, I did not relate that much with the currency part at the beginning, at the very beginning. But I related more with it as a computer science engineer, thinking that this is basically a simple computation logic, but that is happening in a decentralized level. Like that is happening in a way where it is not controlled or not done by one particular party. So it is being done more transparently, is done by the community, and more accountability and everything is there. So I think that was the insight, that this is actually a decentralized server, that is hundreds of people, thousands of people are running this server, and this server is doing this small computation. What if this same setting can be applied to complex business logic, right?
Sure.
And I, by that time, I did not know about Ethereum, and then in 2 to 3 weeks after that, I stumbled onto Ethereum, and I was like, okay, this is the thing that I've been thinking all this while. And that was the time when I went all in. I clearly could see that this is the future. There is no way that the next leap of human evolution is not going to happen in this way, right? Because in the last like 50 years, 160 years since the internet has been there, our interactions have become more and more digital. And these interactions always, like all our peer-to-peer interactions, have also become like a third party based transactions. Like we interact on a digital platform with somebody, and that somebody is interacting with the other party also, right? So there is always a trusted party in the system in between. And this basically technology is allowing those peer-to-peer interactions, digital interactions, to happen uh, without a need of a trusted third party. So it was very clear to my mind that eventually the whole humanity is going to move into something like this. And that's when I went all in into that. So yeah, that's the background story. And after that, like whatever happened, yeah, is
Thanks, Sandeep.
yeah, go ahead.
Great. Moving on to Akshay. Akshay, we've known each other for about 6 months now or more. So if you can talk about your own journey, switch to Web3, and maybe your own inflection point, right? Like when did this all strike, and that aha moment of, I'm full-time Web3.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think that, look, I'm not an engineer, so I'm not as smart as any of the folks here, right? So I come at it from, if the IQ bell curve, I come at it on the left-hand side of the curve, and I'm much more of a right brain thinker, and I think my strengths are to be creative, not technical or analytical, right? So when I saw something where like crypto, to me, the thing that really drew me in was, I think, the idea that creative folks and labor was not had not gained the fruits of financialization of our economy in the last 10 years, right? So if you look at how much people got paid, that has remained somewhat flat, but the owners of assets have benefited enormously through all of the kind of like the political intervention within the economy. And I think the for creative people, you can be creative only when you're bored, right? And I always found it somewhat of a weird thing that there was no room for boredom in somebody in a working life, right? It's not 9 to 5, it's usually 9 to 9, right? And or you're tired at the end of it, and even then it doesn't feel enough, right? Like everybody's felt some version of this. And I think it's because you didn't have the ability for the labor class to own assets, right? Time comes a full circle. None of this is new, but I think that was what really kind of like sparked this interest in for me. And I think the this idea of, okay, what if assets were just digits in a database, and what if that database was public, and what if everybody could own it, was a really interesting societal uh, question for me, rather than a technical one. And that's really what drew me in. And then we can go into specifics about what interests me, but that's, I think, at the core of what got me interested.
Excellent, excellent. It's interesting that you speak about boredom and crypto world. Though once I entered the crypto world, it's been a 24/7 super stimulating experience. I don't know if any of us have time to feel bored, but yeah. Thanks, Akshay. Thanks, Akshay. So, Tanay, we have an interesting backstory. I don't know if you, my background, earlier to SoulRaiser, my background was in education technology. So I was doing this business simulations for learning, and I see that you are in fact doing something very, very similar, but at a very large scale and in the metaverse, right? So very excited to know about your journey and how did you make the switch?
Hey, thank you, Vijay. Thank you, Sandeep and Akshay, for being here. Actually, I'm a pretty what do you call crypto noob. I don't understand crypto much. I honestly I have not invested money in any of this, right? And when I started talking about metaversity and the whole plan, I realized that you can't have something like a metaverse without an economics, right? You cannot have a universe without finance, and that's where my interest into this grew. And second thing which I was thinking around is credentialing, right? In current education system, you see you have a Harvard degree, you have an MIT degree, but those degrees are granted from an institution. Instead, we believe more on proof of work in a very different way than what like how proof of work is used by crypto. But if you know how to write a marketing plan, if you know how to write a financial statement, then that itself is your proof of work. And as long as that is verified and it's somewhere on the chain, right, you are basically saying, hey, I don't need a degree, this is my degree, just go and see all of that. So that's where my interest grew into crypto, because I feel that as a technology it has a lot of promise, right? And I made some apps actually. The CEO and founder of Quest book, he himself very graciously he showed me how to make apps. We did a lot of live sessions on YouTube, received really well feedback there. But then we also realized that you can only solve so many problems at one point of time, and at this point of time we're not ready to solve these credentialing problems through crypto. And that has been my journey and my understanding. So I'm here mostly to learn from all three of you and hear out what more can be done in this space.
Great, great. Thanks, Tanay. So I thought I'll focus a little bit on fundamentals and definitions before we get into dirty details, right? So maybe we start with why Web3. I think Sandeep also kind of touched upon this topic, talking about trustless third parties, but Sandeep and actually everyone else, right? So if you can speak about why fundamentally Web3 and why should it even exist, right? Like, what are the large problems in the Web2 space right now, and how is Web3 kind of solving it and probably potentially introducing a few more new newer problems, right? So what's your take on that?
Yeah, so I mean, I can take a so basically, like Web3 overall is, I would say, two, three things that Web3 offers, right? So, and when we say Web3 is actually a much larger term which includes artificial intelligence also, and things like that. But for this context, when we are talking about Web3, we'll be talking about these crypto. And again, like one more thing, crypto doesn't mean cryptocurrency. Crypto means cryptography based technologies. So in India, it's kind of has become a or like globally also, when we say crypto, like are you working in crypto? People think that you are working in cryptocurrency part, but you are basically working on these cryptography based new systems that are coming in. So there are three, four things that these systems provide. Like one is the user ownership of things, right? And I'll explain more about that. So for example, right now we are on Airmeet, right? And I think that I am on my own account on on Airmeet, and everybody else is thinking, but actually this account is owned by Airmeet. Like Airmeet can anytime just now ban me, and I can never join any Airmeet meeting again. Similarly, it's for your Twitter account. If Donald Trump can be banned from a platform, then anybody else can be banned, right? So similarly, your banks, like and many of you guys might be knowing that's what happened with the very large bank in 1.5 years back in India itself, where the bank simply came up and told that they don't have your money which you owe there, right? So you think that it's your money, but it's not, right? So, and similarly, think about in this increasingly social media oriented world, where let's say you are a creator, right, and you have 100,000 followers on Twitter or YouTube, right? And suddenly you say something, and which is not aligned to the terms, and not terms and condition, but let's say the philosophy, because many of these platforms are actually having their own biases towards what is right and what is wrong, right? And if you are wrong according to them, they can simply ban you and you lose your entire 100,000 or a million followers immediately. But imagine if you owned in a Web3 ecosystem, you owned your followers, and if the platform is not, you don't agree with the platform, you can leave the platform with all your followers, right, to somewhere else. Imagine that kind of future, right? And imagine, like, when you have your money, you really own it as a sovereign individual, not like some bank owning it for you. So that ownership part is the most important part of the Web3. Second part of the Web3 is a verifiable computation, right? And many people don't pay much attention to this part, but I want to emphasize, especially because we have a lot of engineers in the audience, that this whole revolution is also one important part that is going here, is that when you how is us what is different in a smart contract than a normal piece of code, right? That that when you have deployed a smart contract on a blockchain, and it says that, okay, I will take A and B in, and I will do A plus B and give you out C, then it cannot do anything other than that, right? Whereas in a centralized, when you are running a code on a server, you can anytime change this code, and now it's, instead of A plus B, it is giving output as A minus B, right? So
Yep.
this verifiable compute, wherein, like, let's take a actual real example. Let's say I am on Facebook, and Facebook is showing me a particular, like, and we know that there have been so many debates about these social media platforms, kind of influencing, or algorithms influencing our feeds that we see in our accounts, right? Imagine you had a Facebook where the algorithm to show your feed is open source, and that this is how this is going to be computed. The rules are written somewhere, and that, okay, these are trustable, right? So that kind of, that this environment, that the platform cannot manipulate your thoughts, which happens today very readily, even during the elections and all that. So this verifiable computation is also a very important part of blockchains, right? And other things are, like, maybe other buzzwords, that it is like fully transparent and auditable, which is correct because these are public ledgers. But that might or might not be true. If you are using zero knowledge based encryption, then you don't, maybe some things are not transparent. So, but that's
Yeah.
again, one of the things. Even if it's encrypted, but it's encrypted in a predictable way, that is also important. And of course, like, when you removal of a trusted third party in between has been the one thing. But for the engineers, I want them to understand these two things. Like, from my side, I feel these two are most important: ownership, full ownership of the end user, and verifiable computation. That means chain computation. And I think that is what is happening in Web3. And now you can apply these concepts to anything and everything. It is applicable to banks. It is applicable to social media. As Akshay was saying, it is applicable to creators, where creators can create something and truly own something, instead of you being a designer, you putting something on Behance or somewhere else. You really own something, and people can buy rights to your creativities. So it can be applied to anything and everything that you can imagine. It can be, the transparency can be applied to government voting, where you only can vote, and anything and everything, as I was saying, that related to our current digital world.
So a couple of follow-up questions that strike me as you were speaking, Sandeep. One was about ownership. It's truly censorship-resistant protocols that we're talking about, where you have complete ownership, not dependent on any IOU kind of contracts with trusted third parties, right? So while that is cool, so you're talking about verifiable computation, that suddenly translates to all your code being open source. While some of these blockchains enforce you to make all your code open source, some necessarily be, right? What's in space, and if
Akshay, is it only me, or you are also losing Vijay in between?
What are your comments on that?
Yeah, I think Vijay, we lost you there for a second. You may have to repeat that real quick.
Just repeat the last part of the question, Vijay.
Sorry,
your voice is breaking.
Yeah, I was just talking about open source and its importance in the blockchain world. Given that verifiable computation is a necessity, now how important do you think is open source? I think the answer is obvious, but just wanted to hear your thoughts.
Yes. So obviously, like as you said, that open source is is very important for a variety of things. On blockchain, when you put your bytecode, it can anyways be reverse engineered, right? So, but then I'll give you a recent example. For example, with Ethereum, a large part of the code on the overall ecosystem is always open source, and fully in public. And that's why in the last 4 or 5 years, there have been so many, positively, I'm saying positively, there have been so much of battle testedness because of these hacks and all that, so that those there are at least some level of design patterns which have evolved. Whereas some of the newer ecosystems, like for example, even right now, I would say even Solana, not a lot of smart contracts are open source. So there has not been enough battle testing. When that battle testing or hacking happens, you come up with more design patterns that, okay, this is how the programming should be done. Should be this. And this is even now on Ethereum, if you are a bad programmer, you can get hacked, right? But there is some level of standardness that has come. So for every ecosystem, this comes as more and more source code becomes open source. And I think I hope that will happen with other ecosystems also. So open source definitely very important. But apart from that, like for example, zero knowledge technology, right? This can become a very technical topic, but zero knowledge technology is like kind of something out of straight out of the Matrix Matrix movie. So here you can have some sort of computation in an offline mode where you don't know what is the computation. You have no clue, but you can put a circuit on let's say on a verifiable layer, let's say on Ethereum, and you can say that whatever this computation is being done, even if it's closed source, even if you don't know what is going to happen, but if you have a set of inputs, like let's say inputs A and B, and C is coming out, and you put these input and outputs on a verifiable chain, this will always be, it can tell you that this is the correct output, right? There can be no changes there. So this kind of things are also coming. So maybe, and Vijay, I also understand, like inherently what is kind of in the back of this question of open sources, that you have these large organizations which have competitive advantages. They don't want to open source everything on day zero, right? They want to have their moats built, and this will always be true for businesses. I think that's why zero knowledge technology also becomes very important in this world. That's why I selectively said, I did not say censorship resistance and this transparency of code as the main things. Verifiable compute is something where I don't know how it is being computed, but I know that what was told to me in this circuit this is exactly how it is being computed, and this is where the Web3 can achieve, internet level scale, because the large businesses will always need, kind of some level of moat building and all that. So
Absolutely.
that's
Oh, this is super interesting. Yeah, I can certainly think of how large organizations can certainly adopt and the power of zero knowledge proofs, right? Great.
yeah.
Thanks, Sandeep. And Akshay, over to you. Maybe one question other than why Web3. So when we speak about Web3 and public ledgers and suddenly speak about privacy, right? These two seem very orthogonal. Any thoughts on for the common public, right? When we're thinking about public ledgers and privacy, how do these two things go together, and how is privacy very important, and how is it achieved in the blockchain world, right? Your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think that may have in the long term to do something with the mass adoption of zero knowledge proofs. But more broadly, I would say that it kind of presumes that you have some degree of privacy when you're dealing with centralized actors, or these banks, or if you think about your life, it's basically your entire life, and its attributes, your net worth, how much money you have, what assets you own, like what movies you watched, what kind of products you buy, are all an entry in somebody's database. That's really all it
Right.
is, right? Like there's some Excel spreadsheet tracking how much money you have. We call that a bank. There's some spreadsheet tracking how many shares of Apple you have. We call that whatever your broker is. If you're broking in Zerodha, and so on and so forth, right? Your name is an entry in Twitter's ledger if you have a Twitter account. Similar for Instagram. So in our life, we're trusting that the person with root access to that spreadsheet is not clicking the share button on the top right corner and sharing it with people that you don't want your data to be shared with. Not only are you trusting them with that, you're also trusting them with the fact that their access controls and security is good enough that motivated hackers cannot steal that information that could be valuable. So I think privacy is it's one of these things where I think you can have a world where there is actually no privacy, even in a world with centralized actors. Now, of course, it's way better than having all your transactions reflect on chain. Now, one other the thing I would say there is, your identity is a public key, so it's somewhat one step removed from who you are, but it's still not not what it's not at the state where that's giving people privacy. And in fact, I would just say that the privacy is probably not even the goal in a lot of these cases. It's to ensure transparency in what's done, and sovereignty um, in the data that's owned, right? So you're reclaiming the trust you have put into somebody who's managing that spreadsheet onto yourself. It's not for everybody in the beginning. Often the knock on Web3 is, it's really bad UI, and that's true. And I feel like we just need more like Web2 folks coming over to build it. But it's also, I don't use the MetaMask wallet because it's better than my bank account. I use it because it's different from what my bank account provides, right? I'm able to custody assets and invest in assets that I would not be able to through my bank account, because maybe there's accreditation laws that don't allow somebody like me who's not very, who doesn't meet the wealth standard to invest in private companies, but I can be a part of capital formation in Web3 because anybody can invest. So it's just a different product. And if so many people are using a dramatically worse product where, and they continue to use it, that's actually a reasonably good sign that there's some differentiated competitive advantage, right? So that's kind of what I would say on how blockchains and don't necessarily guarantee privacy, but neither do centralized actors.
Yeah. And one thing I want to add over there is that blockchains inherently, as Akshay said, that they are not built for privacy, more for transparency. But on the top of them, you can add these kind of encryption mechanisms and things like that. We recently announced Polygon ID, and where what we are doing is, like, again, I'll give you the example of like what Akshay was saying, that for example, whether I am eligible right now, if a bank wants to know that whether I'm eligible for an investment into a particular thing or not, whether I have a net worth more than this or not. What I have to do today is, or whether I have a legit KYC, what I have to do today is that I have to give all my documents to them for them to verify, for somebody else to verify, right? So that's what we call like KYC and KYB things. What if we could build a system wherein I have a proven KYC credential on chain or somewhere in a encrypted manner, and you could ask me questions. You could say that prove that you are more than 18 years of age, prove that you are a Indian citizen, or prove that you have $1 million in your last audit report, or whatever yearly report closing, you had more than $1 million in this. So instead of I sharing my entire data, I prove you with a zero knowledge proof where you are also 100% sure that I cannot lie about it, because I have done it verified with somebody else, but he has given me, some verified entity has given me this thing, that I have those things. Now I don't need to share it to everybody else, and I only prove my stuff. So that is something which we believe that will spur the next stage of growth for Web3 and blockchain enabled technologies, and that's why we launched Polygon ID recently, and we have some really big names working on the same with us.
Thanks, Sandeep. Tanay, question for you on Web3. How did you transition into that? I know you're building this really cool metaverse. I got to see the video. I must say that it's pretty interesting. I'd love to try out the product now. How are you integrating these two, right? So while virtual reality in itself can exist, the university in itself can exist without crypto, but you spoke about introducing that financial angle, financial economy into it, right? So I would love to know more.
Yeah, no. So we did discuss about this a lot, right? And we realized that metaverse in itself has multiple angles, right? One angle is the physical, the hardware angle, which is hardware has to be pushed to its own limit, and then there is this identity angle wherein you have to be like an avatar and you need to assume a persona, and then after identity you have this reality / presence angle wherein you have a 3D world or a 2D world or whatever, and you embody your persona there, right? So all these three pieces are there, and then definitely there is the whole finance, economics, tokenomics piece. So we decided we will build more, like out of these four pillars, we'll build more on the identity and the reality embodiment piece. And hardware, we don't have the kind of funds, and we believe other players are doing really good job there. And on the tokenomics piece also, we decided we will not build it for the MVP for right now. We'll build it later when we have to build it. Because see, my take with Web3 was that while the technology is very promising, and I have been a ethical hacker myself for almost 3 years. Like I was in a job, Mr. Robot wala job. Then there's a face. The similarity doesn't end on the face. I also had a job like that for almost 3 years. I understand crypto. I understand cryptography, and there are multiple applications of this technology, I feel. And at the same time, what Akshay was saying is also very right, that this is not ready for a mass adoption right now. And also the DX, and I think Sandeep and the guys there are doing a great job on the developer experience part, right? Because you have to handle both the UX and the DX for anything to go mass adoption. And while we are building the reality piece of metaverse, I'm hoping Sandeep, Akshay, Vijay, you guys would build on the tokenomics part well, on the UX and the DX piece, and someday we'll meet somewhere in between and we'll have like a real metaverse of what people are thinking, because we can't build all of it ourselves.
Sure. Then a curious question. In 2007, I was using this software. I mean, not even a software. It was this virtual reality setup called Second Life.
Mm-hmm.
It had this concept of Linden dollars. Very, very I like what it is happening to be in the 2022 crypto metaverses, right? So, and I know that it was super painful to use it then, because 2007 internet speeds were like so slow that you make a click and then you have to wait until the person responds for about 2 minutes. Now, is that the part you were speaking about when you said we're not focusing on hardware right now? Because
we are
is that kind of sorted now?
it is not, obviously it is not, but it's still better, right? Internet speed is better. You have more processing in your hand right now, on your phone, on your laptop, everywhere else. You have devices integrated now. You have, everyone has a mic and a camera and everything right there. But still it's not sorted. Like, we are trying to build a metaverse as low poly, as low bandwidth usage, as low performance usage as possible, because we are trying to build it for India, right? So we do not want to assume that everyone has everything, right? And we tested, so the metaverse city is what we name it, right? So metaverse city, we tested on VR, on laptop, on phone. While the VR device experience is the best experience, right, it still has its own limitations, right? Hardware is clunky right now. After 15-20 minutes you start feeling little bit of nausea. The battery is a problem. It's also not a creation device, it's a consumption device, right? So you can't have education inside metaverse. Only consumption is not possible in education, right? You have to create something, you have to apply things. So I think there are parallel movements going on in the industry right now. There are people who are building on the hardware piece more, software piece more, crypto piece more. And if someone asks me today, what is metaverse, or I think it's too early to tell what it will be or what it is. But at one place, it will be something which will replace how we see internet today. That's how I see internet being replaced. And the moment you replace internet, you have to replace identity, you have to replace payments. Now, whether we replace payments by crypto or whatever we have today, or whether we replace identity with crypto or whatever we have today, that only time will tell. And I think that's an uphill battle for anyone who's working in the Web3 space right now. Because no matter what we say or what we tell, the common janta doesn't care about all of these pieces, right? Either you have to do a lot of education to make them care, or we have to solve the UX in such a way that people do not have to care and they still get the best out of this possible. So I'm waiting for other folks to build on these pieces and solve these problems while I solve the education problem on metaverse. And then somewhere we'll meet and we'll make something amazing.
Right. That's a nice segue into one of the questions I had, right? So, roadmap to mass adoption of crypto. If you think about the kind of stuff that's happening, I think it's a little intimidating for a regular, normal user trying to sample out some of the stuff, some interesting stuff that's happening. You think about wallet addresses. Hey, I need to store this 24-word secret recovery phrase, and if you lose it, you lose all your money. All of this seems very intimidating, and the word cryptocurrency, crypto itself seems very cryptic. I think it's good that we've pivoted to renaming it to Web3. A lot of people are able to relate to it. Yeah. So your thoughts, Akshay and Sandeep, on what is that one thing, or maybe a couple of things that the industry as such should focus on to look at taking this adoption to masses, right?
Akshay, you want to start? Then I can.
Sure. I mean, I have a pretty straightforward responses that I've been thinking through, and I think honestly, like this category of fintech on the front end and crypto on the back end is pretty attractive. It brings together. I often find the Web3 versus not Web3 type debates rather bland. I think that these are just tools that can be used creatively, and I think there may be scope for like Web 2.5 ish, where you have the experience of the fintech on the front end for the user, so all of the complexity is abstracted away. Yet you have all the upside of crypto on the back end, and if the users become sophisticated crypto native folks, they have the ability to move from one fintech app to another, or even on chain directly if they ever wanted to. And just that option of exit, I think, will force responsible behavior on part of a lot of these fintech companies. And guess what? A lot of the fintech companies are right now fintech on the front end and banks on the back end. I don't think many of them are particularly delighted about that combination. Neither are the companies nor the users. And so, that I think is really interesting. You're seeing early versions of this with Flint and Pillow Fund. Like, those are two companies that are good examples of things like this. FTX has recently launched something called the FTX White Label, where anybody can integrate a crypto exchange within their app, right? Whether you're a fintech app, maybe like Cred tomorrow wants to start a fintech, crypto exchange, they don't need their own order books. They just pull from an API, right? Things like this, I think, are very interesting. And finally, I think Polygon and Solana are truly, I think, special in the space for one reason, which is that I think that it's really hard to get on-chain users on Bitcoin, Ethereum, or any of the other chains, just because of like the fee environment and the, there's just a lot of complexity that results from it. And if we were to ever design systems where you can have like hundreds of millions of on-chain users, I continue to think that execution environments like Polygon and Solana are going to play a critical role in that. And some wonderful Web2 engineers will come and build a nice front end over it, right? And you won't even know you're interacting with Polygon, and someday. And so I think those are the types of things I am really excited about.
Super interesting.
Yeah, you originally asked Vijay that the roadmap of Web3. So I mean, I think that roadmap, Akshay was talking more from the application point of view, and I would talk more from the infrastructure point of view. So on the infrastructure point of view, I think that we are overall as an industry. We saw this whole last 1.5 years of so many apps coming into blockchains and things like that, right? This I used to call it, I call it app era, right? The app era only started when, of course, DeFi started before the scalability came through, but this NFTs and gaming and everything started once there was some level of scalability. Like before the DeFi wave came in, I think the total DAU, daily active users, which all the blockchains, which was primarily Bitcoin and Ethereum, could sustain was hardly, let's say, 400 500k. Beyond that, the gas fees or even the Bitcoin transaction fees started skyrocketing. And even with those numbers, like 300 400, it was already very high. Then I think some level of scalability came in. Some solutions like Polygon, Solana, some of these other solutions came in where some level of scalability was available for these applications, and then immediately we saw this huge wave of applications coming in, right? And now I think right now the industry can sustain, like, even with this all this hype of like multiple $1 trillion industry and all that, the total amount of DAU that the whole industry today has is hardly 3 million users, right? Barring some centralized chains and all that, like gaming chains and all that, that's separate. But overall DAU is 3 to 4 million, which is actually lower than a mildly successful game, right? A mildly successful game will have more users than that. So and I think now currently we have scalability available at the infrastructure level, which can sustain probably less than 10 million, 8 to 10 million users, DAU users, right? Beyond that, everything will go for a toss, every chain in the industry. So what we need to do is next 12 to 18 months on an infrastructure level is to reach a place where we can sustain, let's say, 50 to 100 million users, like a 10x scalability from here. And then that is 12 to 18 months plan, like how we also think at Polygon. And then is a time where in next, let's say, 36 to 48 months, we need to go to a place where we can sustain 1 billion users or daily active users on the entire of, let's say, Web3.
Sure.
So that is like in our mind, like the daily active users is the roadmap for Web3.
Got it.
Currently, we need to reach to a place where 50 to 100 million users can come in. That will already spur so much growth for various different kind of apps, be it on finance, gaming, other casual apps and things like that. So yeah,
Sure.
we are working towards that.
Sure. Thanks, Sandeep. So I think we have about 15 more minutes left. So I think I'll cover a few more important questions I have on my list. One of the things is, so we see India is a very exciting space for Web3 as a whole. We have a lot of action happening. So how do you think India is positioned for being a Web3 powerhouse? Like, what are your thoughts? Any one of you can pick it up and probably answer from your experience. Actually, you want to, or Sandeep?
You want to go?
You're on mute, Akshay.
Yeah, sorry. So are we talking specifically about developer ecosystem in India? And
no, in general, right? So we have a huge population of young audience. We have developers, massive developer population. In general, adoption. of Web3 in India? So you can pick
Yeah.
any of the.
I think there are three parts to
Yeah.
this question, right? Developer adoption, user adoption, and also regulation. So which part do you want to talk about? That is the main piece here.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I can talk from my experience. Like, I think we've rolled out Solana in the region here in India and Indonesia. We're doing Vietnam next month, and the rolling out of a L1 blockchain like Solana is basically a developer facing platform, right? And when we think about expansion, we think about it as incubating a early community of the following groups of people in the following order, right? The first is developers. They're the highest leveraged folks. They're the one building all the infrastructure, and that's who you need. But and ideally, that's who you want to get get incubated as a community. Then the second is, if there's not enough of a technical bench strength, in some countries there aren't, then it's artists, right? So the first group is leveraged by code, the second group is leveraged by content, and they're able to bring culture on chain. So it's developers, artists. The third group is actually producers or contributors. These are people who are working remote, right, and taking advantage of like this remote work lifestyle that you get with Web3, being able to earn in assets as opposed to the local currency. And then of course, with the new taxation regime, I think that's just only going to go up, not down, because of the foreseeability that people have in being a marketer, in a designer, and just earning remotely. And then the fourth category is users, right? On-chain users, which is typically tends to be the first category for Web 2, which is user is a word to describe such a passive actor in the space, right? But in crypto, it just tends to be more active participation. And then the last group is investors, because everybody's an investor, and like capital is abundant, and that tends to not be the most important thing. So these are the 5 groups of people, and I think India stands really tall in the developer bench strength, in the artist strength. You're seeing a lot of these artists now live independent, they make money. We are one of the countries with the highest number of H1B visas. So guess what? Like even contributors or all these remote workers are now, they are not constrained by the H1B visa. Out of every 10 people, if 2 people got the H1B visa, the other 8 can go get the Web3 visa, which is download MetaMask or Phantom and start working on jobs that are remote. Regardless of whether Web3 ends up being an industry in the long term or not, the fact is that they're able to be a part of this global experiment and make a living remotely, which I think is really valuable. So those are the 5 communities that I think about in that order, and I'm not that worried about regulation in India longer term. I do think that look, this is the government has come a long way from a ban to regulation, right? And the government is not a monolith. I used to do public policy for my previous company. It's not a monolith. There's the RBI and there's the finance ministry, there's the PMO. Everybody has different opinions, and you often it takes time to iron out what the final position is. And I think that the fact that they've reversed the course from a ban to regulation with somewhat stringent regulation means that it's going to get better, right? Like regulation is a process, not a step. And so I expect that as the industry grows, they'll see that this is actually about developers like Sandeep, and not traders or whatever who are gambling online. And even though that gets the majority of the narrative, and I do think that changes over time. It may be slow and it may be not to our liking, because everything moves fast in tech. But I generally I've learned in life that patience is one of these things that you just have to cultivate, or you'll end up frustrating yourself.
Yeah. Sure, Akshay.
I
Anything
think
from
I
you,
also
Sandeep?
have similar thoughts. Like on the developer level, like India is definitely, India definitely stands tall, and I feel that somehow it is the first time that Indian developers, have got or Indian entrepreneurs have got the access to the global audiences. Right? Previously, it was very difficult for Indian entrepreneurs to go out and build global startups. Now,
Yep.
we have that the capital is coming in, and then these developers can open up these web3 is inherently borderless, so the entrepreneurs in the web3 space can build for the globe from get go. And that gives us a power of, or that gives an opportunity to Indian entrepreneurs to build like truly global firms and brands, which was not possible till now, right? I mean, previously we used to have big startups, and then Amazons of the world will come in, and then throw in a lot of money, and then these developers will have issues, right? But now it's kind of reverse. Like our guys can go out and play on the global scale. So that is something that is most exciting for me. And as Akshay was saying that I am also not much worried about regulations. And to be honest, I don't even spend too much time. Like, even though if somebody is asking me questions or somebody needs any guidance, let's say within the governments and government bodies, I'm more than happy to help. But the way I look at it is that if I am able to help, or we as an ecosystem are able to help 100 unicorns in India in next 1.5 2 years, then government will have to come across and regulate it positively, right? There is no way that government can refute it. And that's what I am and we are playing it, like how can we help 100 Indian companies become unicorns in
Okay,
next
okay. So you have a very aggressive timeline. You're talking about 100 unicorns in the next 2 years, and I presume all Web3. Yeah.
No, in crypto lines, 2 years is a very big time. It's actually
Yeah.
8 years I'm talking about.
Yeah, it's a decade.
Dog years.
So 2 years is a very big time. Like, I never talk about anything which is more than 3 months in horizon. So
Absolutely.
because 3 months is 1 year here.
Sure. So and any thoughts from you, Tanay? This particular topic, India and Web3.
I feel India is, as Sandeep and Akshay said, blessed with great adoption and as well as developers, right? So that we have to, like, infrastructure is getting ready, the buzz is there. We have to be very wary of the developer experience as well, so that new developers can also get into, and not something which is not reserved for only the experienced devs. Like, I work mostly with beginners, and we have 800 developers who are getting out this June in different startups, and a lot of Web3 startups have also lined up to hire. So I'm also a little worried about how how fresher friendly is Web3, because my stint with Web3 was that you can't, like, once you have deployed the code, you can't go ahead and change it, so you have to do a redeploy and things like that. I think those are some problems which we have to solve for developers as well. We are, like, speaking from developer ecosystem, we are prone to do or introduce bugs, right? That's our rosy roti. So how do we
No,
take
sorry to interrupt you on that, but actually there are already a lot of design patterns which now allow you to have upgradable smart contracts.
Right. No, I looked into that, but still, I feel that it's still a lot of work to do. Like, you have to have a lot of work to have upgradable contracts, and it doesn't feel intuitive even now. So I think that's where we have to work some more on those lines, because I
Sure.
remember when we shifted from different frameworks to different frameworks, been doing this for 15 years. Every time there is a better developer experience, the adoption just spikes, right? There is money on the table, but DX is also something which is very important for adoption for anything right now.
Sure. Great. So one of the questions I wanted to ask specifically, Akshay, you mentioned you're not an engineer, and for all the folks listening in and probably tuning into this panel, right? So what are a few things that non-engineers can try and do to get into Web3, right? So people thinking are the only ones who can make it in Web3. I'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, I mean, I have a pretty straightforward answer to this. I think freelance work has bottomed by the bottom, and I think this kind of like idea of full-time employment where you're paid a static salary that goes up by an arbitrary percentage every year, reviewed by a middle manager who may or may not have your best interest at heart, feels like a relic of the industrial era. It's all, and some of the smarter ones have been doing this. Has nothing to do with Web3. I just think Web3 accelerates some of this just because culturally it's just remote by default, right? But if you can go remote and if you can sell your time or your services and just experience what that feels like in exchange for assets, right? There was a painter, like a wall painter, I think, like in Facebook's office, who painted their wall like a wall art, and I think he ended up getting Facebook shares in return in the early days, and I think that ended up being worth like, I don't know, $60-70 million, something like this. And this is to me, that is not. By the way, that's the default in Web3. And so if you can go be a part of an early stage, I think Polygon has their own version of the story where they paid their chartered accountant or landlord, I think, in Matic tokens. And I thought that was really funny that one of the kept it. So I think this idea that you have agency to go bet on a version of the future using your time. You don't have to spend money on this. You don't have to go invest and trade tokens. You can kind of make a few asymmetric bets with your time. It's like angel investing with your time and your skills. I would say that has been the most rewarding thing for me, whether it's making art if you're an artist, or whether it is if you're a marketer, offering your services for that. That I think will give you the closest market feedback on what is true versus what is the hype. Hype is usually a good thing to run from, generally. But every now and then there comes around a thing where it's both underrated and overrated at the same time. I think social media was one of those things. So my mental model has generally been that what social media did to communications, crypto is just doing to finance. And social media, when it launched, was also like, it launched to a lot of hype, but it still remained a dramatically underrated phenomena because it elected the next president of the United States of America. Right. So something can be overhyped for a long time and still be underrated. And you are not going to, I think, at least I didn't know what was real and what wasn't until I really spent time working in the space. And so that's what I would suggest, you don't have to take my word or anybody else's for it. If you can spend your time angel invest with your time and react to that feedback loop, you'll be closest to the truth.
Cool. Thanks, Akshay. And this question is again for anybody to take. So if you're an entrepreneur now thinking to break it into Web3, is there anything very specific that you would tell them, or based on your learnings, right? Say, hey, this would potentially work and this would not work, in terms of the mindset that I would get into starting a new company.
I would say that one thing that I see in India also that is happening, and few entrepreneurs I saw that they chased, because there is a lot of money, capital involved and all that, they chased fast money with those token upsides and things like that. And then with token, you have to realize that as a token startup, generally it is not considered good, because you launch a public token, it's not considered good to have multiple tokens, right? And pivoting is very difficult. So in a normal startup, you have in a private setting, you start something and it doesn't work, you change something, pivot, and you can keep doing it 3-4 times. But token markets, especially if your token is already public and community has bought it, and then you pivot into something else and that goes to zero, that's almost like considered a scam in the industry, right? So you can lose your reputation very fast, very early, even though your intentions were correct and you wanted to pivot later on. So don't get into the short-term mindset, I would say, too much. And if you have to pivot, take your community along. Do not do a pivot just saying that, okay, I'm abandoning this project and going to other one. Just take your previous token cap into your next project in that sense. So those would be the few things.
Got it. Any thoughts, Tanay, Akshay?
Akshay, if you want to go first, go ahead.
Web3 entrepreneurs, anything that they need to think about?
So Tanay, please go.
Yeah, so I was asked this question few weeks back, and my answer was, as an entrepreneur, you should not classify yourself, and I say the same thing as programmers also. You should not have a qualifier for yourself, Web3 entrepreneur, JavaScript developer, and things like that. You are out there to solve a business problem. You're out there to solve a user problem. So first, identify, is Web3 the right solution for the problem, and if there are enough users, enough demand to even hit PMF. So just because it's not being done, like there's no Twitter in Web3 or there's no Facebook in Web3, you shouldn't get and start building all those pieces as an entrepreneur. Like let the ecosystem also mature a little bit and look for real problems to solve, so that your app can be the face of this whole ecosystem, saying, hey, see how this problem was solved specifically using Web3, because it's a Web3 specific problem. And that's why in finance, this outshines everything else, right? Because it just works very well. And as Akshay also pointed out, so My 2-bit advice would be that, solve the problem, solve for users, not for Web3. That's very, very important when you are getting started as an entrepreneur.
Sure, sure. We'll probably take one last question and wrap it up. I think probably the most important question for last. So we have so many students tuning in and probably a lot of others tuning into this. So if there is one advice you would give to people trying to break into Web3, what would that be? I think maybe a specific actionable advice for engineers or entrepreneurs out there trying to get into Web3. I think Akshay kind of covered it. Maybe if there's anything more you want to add, please do. Otherwise, yeah, Sandeep, Tanay, and
I mean, I'm just going to say, go earn your first $500 on the internet, sitting in your hostel room or basement or wherever you are right now.
That's a great advice. Go on your first $500.
Yeah, and my advice would be, with folded hands, that even if you don't understand Web3 right now, do not miss this revolution. Like, you might think that, oh no, doesn't work. This NFT is a scam. This is a scam. That is a scam. Okay, yes, many of these things are, not done in best intentions, but this is something which is going to be a part of, your life, your parents' life, and everybody else in your family in next 5 to 10 years to come. And this is a big, big revolution. Please do not miss out on it. Even if you don't like or don't understand few things right now, keep learning, instead of having a mental barrier that I'm not going to look at it at all. Just keep learning it, and maybe you'll have your aha moment one day.
Definitely. Yeah, more of an engineer advice is that, understand cryptography. You would appreciate the whole Web3 space more, because there's a beauty in cryptography which Web3 is utilizing. So understanding that would definitely help you. Also understand that, this is no magic. So what happens is you have this persona that I'm missing out on something, and I think there is no need to have FOMO. And
Sandeep, can you hear me?
Hey guys, I also need to hop off now. I have another call, but yeah, it's very nice.
Mute पे अभी.
Yeah.
Sure, Sandeep.
Bye guys. Bye bye.
We are joining Sandeep's meeting as well. Bye, Sandeep.
See you.
See you. So yeah, I think no need to have FOMO. Understand the basics, understand the fundamentals. I think that's the most important thing. And even if you spend your 10 or 20 hours, you'll understand the space enough that you can catch on to it whenever is required and whenever this hype meets the reality. So I would suggest that definitely spend time on the fundamentals. Definitely spend time on hands-on creating few pieces. But don't stay in FOMO. Don't miss out on the tech overall.
Perfect. Thanks, Tanay. Thanks, Akshay. I would probably tell the same, right? So
Thank you
get
so
your
much.
hands dirty, and
Thank you.
things will just happen. Thanks,
Thank
folks.
you.
It was a very interesting discussion. Learned a lot. I hope people tuning in also learned a lot.
You have been an awesome host, Vijay. Thank you, Akshay. Lovely learning from both of you. Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you.
We'll
Likewise.
mute now.
Bye-bye.
Right.
Thank you
That-
very much, Mala. Am I audible?
Yeah. I would just like to introduce Ritesh to the audience.
Sure.
It gives me great pleasure to bring our keynote speaker, Dr. Ritesh Malik, founder and CEO of Innovate Co-working, to the stage to enlighten us with his wisdom. Ritesh, a doctor-turned entrepreneur, is presently in charge of a virtual accelerator focused on healthcare and education, with the goal of developing relevant solutions and extensively researched modules through which they can market their products globally. Ritesh is also the founder and trustee of Plaksha University, whose vision is to nurture the next generation of fearless leaders who will solve the toughest challenges of our planet. I'd now like to welcome Ritesh to address our audience.
Thank you very much, Mala. Am I audible?
Yes, you're audible.
Great. I would like to share my screen. I hope that's all right, Mala.
Yeah, you can go ahead.
Sure. Thank you. Great, guys. Super excited to be here. I think I will just. Okay. So yes, I hope you are able to see my screen. Super excited to welcome all of you here at Conquest 2022. I'll start with a very interesting part of what I did with my life, and this is just to let you know that you can be whatever you want to be. This is me back, I think in 2020, in 2012. I was a doctor and I was working at a hospital called Gangaram Hospital. One day I realized one thing, that I hated my education and I wanted to do something which was way different than and what I was being taught. And I always say India is a country of APS, which is the Asian Parent Syndrome. Our teachers and our society decide what we need to do with our lives. And one of the key things that I realized is for being successful at startups was that best founders create opportunities from their own problems. Change is the highest ROI business. Times like these, where disruption is happening at a pace which is unprecedented, you will see that you can be pessimistic or optimistic. And by being optimistic, you can spot the right mega trends and follow change and follow your customers' demands to create massive opportunities for yourself. This is me in 2015. I saw a massive trend, and that was that offices and this is pre-pandemic, in 2014-15 were pathetic. We spend more than 50% of our awake time in offices, and our offices used to be pathetic. And I personally saw such a massive opportunity for creating offices for entrepreneurs and freelancers alone. We said that in India, 28% of seed capital used to go for building offices, and startups were so new that they did not know what they will be doing in the next 9 years. And within the first 6 months, their needs would change. And we said that let us create a Starbucks kind of an office, but for entrepreneurs for as low as 5 to 6,000 rupees per seat per month. And with this, we started our passion of innovate. This was the first campus out of the many that we built in the following years. This is in Connaught Place. We said, let us create the most fostering in physical co-working space in India. And we ended up not copying our international competitors, but using India's design ecosystems and leveraging them. Example, bamboo, example, Indian art forms, and leverage these to create some of the most beautiful campuses in the world. This was our first one, and innovate in Connaught Place. And in the following years, we've been building one after another some of the most beautiful campuses and leveraging things like jute. And if you can see the wall art, this is all made by street art by a lot of young students. And we thought that can we create these kind of cafes where innovation and intellectuality foster together. This is our Bombay campus, this is Kormangla, this is Gurgaon. And we realized that building these kind of spaces really helped our entrepreneurs who worked here. At peak, we had over 35,000 entrepreneurs, freelancers working with us pre-pandemic. This is our Bombay campus, this is Hyderabad, this is Kurla, this is Connaught Place. Again, we are the first co-working company in the world to convert a heritage property in Saket into a co-working space. And we realized that it's all about you. So in 2020s, now you don't sell by pushing marketing, you sell by creating holistic, sustainable, and inclusive communities. One of the key things that we were successful at doing was building the right communities. Make sure whatever your product is, it sells to, and you should be very clear about your TG. The moment you are clear about your TG and your non-TG, you should know what your non-TG is and to whom you do not need to sell. That is one of the most important things that you will see in your journey for marketing. Example, we used to do yoga sessions, we used to do comedy clubs, we used to do cooking sessions, and we realized one thing, that the whole idea is building the right kind of communities for your product. And then we realized one thing, that the basic challenge in India is that we are the largest digital democracy. We will be having 100 crore internet users, but we are still a consuming nation when it comes to internet. We are not producing enough number of products, and creating the world-class products for India is the goal. So for that, after that, I started angel investing in a lot of great companies like Pepper Content, which is, by the way, from Bits, like Joe Stocks, Safe Security, Keto, Inc. 42, Infido. And after doing all of this, we realized that the fundamental change that needs to be brought on in India has to be brought on by education. And changing education is a very, very fundamental lever to building India into a product nation. So this is a mission that 2025 of us took, who are the trustees of Laksha University. This is a 50-acre campus that we have built, which is completely philanthropic in nature. And we are trying to foster the future. Unfortunately, our education system is teaching us things of the past, whereas we want to teach things that are going to happen in the 22nd century, where we want to teach things that are going to happen in 2050. Robotics, artificial intelligence, nanotechnology, metaverse, genomics, precision medicine, 3D printing, 5G. There's so many things that, and then the most important thing is our ability to teach our students to unlearn, relearn, and then learn again. And this ability is extremely important. So yes, so this is my journey so far. The whole idea is the world is changing at the pace of light. The first principles will always keep you grounded. A lot of people, and this is these are my lessons after doing a lot of undergoing a lot of failures. The first one is focus. Make sure you only do 1 or 2 things maximum in a day, and have an anti-focus list. Do not do a lot of things. Go deep, and always go deep. I think focus is one of the most critical and underrated qualities of successful entrepreneurs. Be frugal. Frugal means frugal plus agile. But we believe frugal is only for money, but it is also for your time. The most important frugality that needs to be experienced is in your time. Build amazing levels of clarity. Your job is create digital solace for 2 to 3 hours every day. Switch off your WhatsApp, mobiles, everything, and spend time with your paper every single day. Write for 1 to 2 hours, and you will see you are not the CEO of your company, you are the chief clarity officer of your company. The more clarity you get, the better it becomes for your organization. Make a no bullshit organization. Ensure that so neither give excuses nor take. A no excuse whose non-bullshit culture is what it would require to build a large, amazing company. By the end of the day, a company's success is finally dependent on the first 20 people that they hire. The most important thing is, जो पहले 20 लोग आप hire करते हो, make sure that the first 20 people, you hire them yourself, you talk to them, and actually make sure that you spend time with them before making this decision, because cultural alignment is so important, because a startup is nothing but the group of first 20 people that works on it. These are large companies. Everyone knows Kodak has gone down. These are the founders of BlackBerry. Large companies go down until and unless you make sure that you are changing your product, and this is called dynamism of product. People think that we have built a product and now we are going to sell it for the next 10 years. That does not happen. Your product needs to change every single day. A product is like a living organism, and change is inevitable. If you're not changing, if you're not talking to your customers, in our company, we were very cognizant. The senior leadership had to talk to a few customers every single week, and we realized the more you talk to your customers, the better it is for your for being very close. You need to have your ear right on the road on what is happening and how are people thinking about your product. One of the key things that people ask me is how do you kill how to kill capital of large companies and nail the market. I always believe speed, and more than speed, velocity. With the right direction and focus, be extremely niched up, become an underdog. Do not do a lot of unnecessary PR. Stay close to your customer, your net promoter score, what are your customers saying about the product? Are they getting their friends and family and creating a positive customer acquisition cost for you? If the answer is yes, you're doing well. And just ensure that the customer is at the heart of your journey and not VCs or other parts of your journey. Your customer defines everything. If you see amazing, and as a word, so I always call this innovation as a product. When you build a product, innovation as a product is a DNA. You continuously, as a living organism, keep changing your product. Example, what Elon Musk has been able to do is just see where are the logical loopholes in a particular value chain. Example, he realized that one rocket goes in the air and then it never is used again. He started with reusing those rockets. For over 130 times this rocket can be used. Now you save a lot of money if you re-engineer the value chain of a particular industry. And there are so many opportunities. Grameen Bank is an amazing example of what Muhammad Yunus has been able to do in Bangladesh for the poor in the microfinance industry. Amazing things done by the Dabbawala. Don't think that only technology startups can and make money. Any business which is integrated with fundamentals of technology in all the value chain systems is going to make impact. Paytm has done an amazing thing called the sound box. India as a country, it is not again very comfortable with digital, at least when it comes to accepting critical things like payments. They've started a sound box which actually articulates in say 8 or 9 languages for confirming payments. Things like Rickshaw Bank, it's basically a bank for only and only asset management of rickshaws. And the whole idea is these small businesses end up making 25 to 30% return on small assets like rickshaws, whereas they give a lot of jobs. Ikea is the largest consumer for buying wood in the world. A very basic thing like Starbucks, what they do is they just write your name. The idea is innovation is not in technology. It is in making sure that the value that your product is perceived by your customer increases day in and day out. Very small things can increase that particular value. My only request to all of you is disruption is for real. Only the cockroaches will survive in a global apocalypse. Dinosaurs are the first to extinct. As Charles Darwin rightly said, it is not the fastest who will survive, it is not the largest who will survive, it is the one who changes with time and changes with the changing environment. And what you don't need to do anything, you just need to innovate it every single day. Each day's success is rented. You need to pay the price by investing into capabilities and research and development. Each day your product should be 1% better. Compounding is magic, especially when it comes to the product. I think the most important thing in today's day and age is whatever you are doing, be it tech, be it non-tech, build by taking technology as a lever across value chains. If you are selling, sell online. If you are building a product, try and build products without human intervention. The most important thing that we are going to see is when the physical world in which we are in today is going to completely merge with the online world, and we are going to see massive opportunities there. Last but not the least, this is something which I always tell people. People think that we are from smaller backgrounds. लोगों को लगता है कि हमारे पास बहुत ज़्यादा पैसे नहीं है तो हम अमीर कैसे बनेंगे या हम लोग सक्सेसफुल कैसे बनेंगे. Out of the 100 richest people in the world today, 27 are heirs. That means उनका पैसा उनके बाप दादा से आया 27 लोगों का. 73 are self-made. Now, I wanted to know क्या ये 73 लोग हार्वर्ड से आते हैं या अमेजिंग इंस्टीट्यूशन से आते हैं. The answer is, out of these 73, 18 have no college degrees and 36 are children of poor parents. And बाकी ना उनके पास पैसा था ना education थी. So that means education is not the only thing that will take you to become successful. So we came up, I did a lot of research of these 100 people, and I came with a very basic mnemonic called the Alchemist Mindset, which states that all these people took action. You're in college right now, you're in the best phase to take risk. Take action. And in today's day and age, it just takes 48 hours to build an MVP. Go take action. The best time to start a business was yesterday, the next best time is now. Today evening, if you have an idea, just start working on it. Code. If you don't know how to code, learn. The second is learning. Make sure in times to come, we are going to see people who learn are going to earn more than people who don't. Your confidence is extremely important. Your humility, the way you treat people, and at the same time being a hustler. Make sure that you work extremely hard, being enthusiastic, being an optimist. Optimist people rule the world. Majestic dreamers. The larger you think, the higher are the chance that you're going to achieve that. Be an innovator. Innovation is going to be the most important lever for your success. Strategic thinkers, clarity, making sure that you have a very well laid out plan in whatever you are thinking. And tinkering is obviously networking, the way you talk to people, the way you build relationships for long term. Be genuinely nice, create value, run a marathon, build culture, have razor focus, and be happy and healthy. I think these things are extremely important for building a holistic startup. I hope this helps. Over to you, Mala and Utkarsh.
Thank you so much, Ritesh, for your eye-opening insights. I'd now like to introduce our next panel for today. The next panel will talk about the future of startup accelerators and their impact on a startup's journey. This panel will offer key insights into the opportunities that startup accelerators can offer.
We'd now like to end this session and move on to our next session for the second panel. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Just to reiterate, the next panel that we'll be introducing will talk about the future of startup accelerators and their impact on a startup's journey. The startup will also offer key insights into the types of opportunities that a startup accelerator can offer.
We shall be graced by the presence of Mr. Arnav Sahu, investor at Y Combinator, who has also previously worked as an investor at Spark Capital and the Blackstone Group. He has previously led mergers and acquisitions at AppDynamics and Cisco, and is currently a member of the Forbes Council and World Economic Forum.
We are also joined by Mr. Rahul Seth, who is a VC investor at Antler and a very proud alumnus of BITS Pilani.
Next up, is Mr. Chintan Bakshi, a partner lead for incubation at CIIE.co, affiliated with IIT. With over 9 years of experience leading ventures in the rural and bottom of the pyramid space, he has been working in the rural market since 2004, developing innovative business models to commercialize grassroots technologies, foster rural entrepreneurship, and provide internet services.
I'd now like to call upon Mr. Arnav Sahu to initiate the panel discussion.
Great. Thank you so much. Really excited to be here. Chintan and Rahul, great to have you guys and look forward to a good conversation. Maybe to kick it off, I think, one of the topics that students were generally interested about was to better understand how startup accelerators in India have evolved in the last 5 years. So maybe Chintan, we can start with you and get your thoughts. And in terms of format, let's keep it as open-ended as possible. I had a few questions, but maybe Chintan, we can start with you and we can just have a good discussion.
Thank you very much. And thanks a lot for inviting me. Just quick sound check. Am I audible?
Yes.
Yeah.
Loud and clear.
Yeah, thanks. So I'll just take, the CIECO sort of context, and that's really the context that we have. We have been doing accelerators, in fact, since 2008, 2009. But I think you're talking more from a 5-year sort of a perspective. I think a couple of things which we have seen change. First is that within CIECO, we have seen that earlier, I mean, maybe 5-10 years back, accelerators would typically be for consumer internet sort of startups. These are startups who could do prototyping, validation, MVPs over a 3-month period. Right? That was essentially the assumption that and that's the fundamental assumption of an accelerator, that you should be able to do some validation in a short period of time, and that's how you get accelerated, and you sort of move to the next level and you become investable and scalable, whatever it is. One of the things that we have done and we have seen happen is that that learning which came from initially from consumer internet technology has now also percolated to other domains. What Ritesh was also talking about. Your startup need not be a pure tech startup. We have done accelerators in the agri space. We have done accelerators in the livelihood space. Right. So so that's one of the things which we have seen change. I think the second thing that we have seen change within CIECO is that I think our earlier accelerators would probably tend to be slightly more knowledge-based, slightly more discussion-based, slightly more kind of a more component of classrooms, etc. But now that component has significantly reduced, and it's more of doing things. Right? It's more of what we call as sprints. In fact, most of our accelerators now have multiple sprints that you do over a 3-month period to do things on the ground, and the knowledge part of it has become much less, and we have tried to structure it towards the beginning of the program, just to give it as an initial hygiene sort of a check. And the real value that we have seen comes to startups is through validation, through actually doing stuff on the ground, failing fast, and then getting a better sense of what they should be doing or should not be doing. I mean, there are many more, but I would just pause with these two. These are two major fundamental changes that we have seen happen.
That's interesting. Rahul, how about yourself?
Right. So I'll cover a bit of a 10-year period because I think that's a lot more representative. At least in my mind, there are 3 distinct phases if you think of it. So there's the pre-2008, 2010 era when, as Chintan said, knowledge wasn't commoditized. There were class rules, just the information and how you think of a company that looks for scale and growth above looking at profitability or making money. How do you look at changing user behavior? Like, that was never a thought process when you thought of building businesses. So the first wave was actually, I would say, accelerators were sort of community common gathering spaces for fellow crazies to get together and find support in each other and be able to do that. And that itself was incredible because you had so few people doing it. 2008, the VC world would fit in, I would assume, like a little room. So Now that's phase one, where knowledge was prime, knowledge was very prized. You had a lot of the people who looked at exchanging knowledge for equity and ownership in companies or access, etc. So people were fundamentally paying for access when they got into an incubator at that point of time, with a little bit of capital thrown in that was necessary. Phase two is what I sort of saw 2012, 13, 14 onwards, where knowledge started to become commoditized. More than that, the feeling of starting up did not remain an outlier. It became an actual career path for everyone in so many ways as such. And when that started to happen, and I don't want to call it the stigma, but when the whole idea about entrepreneurship being so common started to become more and more important, that didn't remain an edge. So that's where capital started to play a part, which is where we had a host. And this was generally led either by the government, educational institutions, or large corporates. So from Cisco Launchpad, Google's Accelerator, Microsoft Accelerator, CIE, and BITS, part of the whole CIE group as well, CEL. So capital started to come in, and capital became, in some ways, the moat. Now, over post 15, 16, 17, with the amount of capital becoming commoditized as well, we saw, okay, knowledge is commoditized, capital is commoditized. What can happen now? Now you have to actually roll up your sleeves and do stuff for founders to be able to work with them as such. And that's sort of the third level where we are today in some ways, where people talk about value add. They talk about what else do you bring to the table? What else do you bring apart from your advice, your suggestions, your capital as such? And that's broadly somewhere where I think we are. There is also other ancillary things provided by accelerators, one of which is legitimacy of some sorts to ideas that otherwise wouldn't be recognized, etc. But these are sort of the broad three phases how I've seen the last 10, 12 years broadly evolve.
No, that's very interesting. And I can share some perspectives from YC, which are consistent. I think three things that we see. I think one, increasingly building a startup is now a global phenomenon. You can be sitting anywhere in the world and building your own company. And at YC now, more than 50% of companies are now international. And this is in direct contrast to what it was when it was started, where actually you were expected to fly down all the way in this little office in California. And if you couldn't fly down, you couldn't join YC. And now all of these programs can be run globally. And I think in a lot of ways, especially founders that are building in Web3 or B2B, where I think commonalities are there across buying centers, you can really build a startup from anywhere. I think the second area where we see just what you mentioned, Rahul, I think in a lot of ways, this is not just true about accelerators, but venture in general. The scarcity is no longer financial capital, it's human capital. Raising money these days with a credible idea and a credible background isn't that hard. It's now then about hiring and about building a great team around you. And increasingly, I think a lot of accelerators and VCs now need to add value, not in a BS way, but actually add value in real, tangible, actionable ways. And I think a big part of that is, building a brand around a VC, getting a peer network of entrepreneurs that can help each other. And in many ways, I think, building a startup is still very, very hard. But I think starting a company now, probably in the history in the last 10 to 15 years, is probably the easiest time to do it, even though it's still hard. But I think it's still the easiest time to be a founder if you compare it over the last 10 to 15 years. So that's what we see from YC.
No, absolutely. I'd love to double click a little bit there, right? And I think this gets to the heart of what accelerators today are in so many ways, which is and both of you have talked to, I can't count the number of founders by now, I'm sure, but you would see themes emerging across what you felt is the strongest areas where founders require help, or you've been able to sort of help founders. Because one of the things that happens is that you're on one end of the spectrum, it's the crazy investors like, I will steer the company and build it from ground up. And there are enough successful examples of those, Sutter Hill being one of the best with that. And there's the other end, which is we'll provide capital and a brand name and take care of the rest as such. And then everyone falls within the spectrum, offering different kinds of things. But what would the two of you say have been the most impactful things that you feel you can do for founders, or you've been able to do as an institution, as an individual for founders? So Arnav, we'll go first with you this time.
Yeah, I can go first. Yeah, I mean, in general, and I had a small startup before as well. I think in general, my perspective is that founders learn best from other founders. And I think as an accelerator or venture firm, it's really important to invest in the best people, because you then bring an automatic peer network to other founders. So for example, if you're part of YC, it is much easier to reach out to other YC founders who've done it before. So I think building a community and cultivating a community around the investments that you make is very important. And you have to be programmatic about that. You have to set up events, you have to set up tactical sessions where you invite other founders to speak to other founders. But I think in general, what I've seen, founders help other founders the most. So can you bring a peer network to someone who's just starting from day zero? And I think the other areas of VC outside of like financial capital where you can add a lot of value is, you are in a very privileged spot where you actually meet, you meet 5 to 10 companies, 5 to 10 founders every single day. As a founder, you might have your blinders on where you're very focused on one particular problem. But what are the broad 2 or 3 strategic things that you need to be thinking about? So encouraging people, especially at the board level, to take a step back and just ask themselves, for example, if you're building a company, it's a Series B company, what would it take to become a $100 million ARR business? Like a simple question like that, forces clarity of thought. So I think it's very important for VCs to bring that macro perspective and ultimately force founders to have the clarity of thought of thinking about like, okay, 1 or 2 years from now, what are the things that I should be doing to get there? So I think those are 2 areas where I see, a lot of VCs adding a ton of value to founders.
Interesting. And Chintan?
Yeah, so I think from our perspective, we are, of course, fundamentally an incubator and an accelerator. And I may be biased by immediacy a little bit, but the areas where we have seen, a lot of value getting added to startups is really helping them identify the one important risk, which is the lever which can actually take them to the next orbit. Were they able to fix it? Right. And in fact, to a large extent, over the last few years, especially after the pandemic, when a lot of these things went virtual, our systems, our structures, processes have been created in such a way that, our focus is really to help a startup identify one big gap or risk that they probably haven't looked at, or as a founder, there are 10 things, 20 things you're doing, but what is that one important thing that you need to focus on in the next 2 to 3 months and try to set right or get a handle on, such that the other things are easier to do, right? So that's what we realize. If you figure out that one risk, the others kind of, the lesser kind of issues, risks, red flags are things that the founders will be able to do over a period of time. So I think that for us has been one of the main value adds that we have seen, being given, startup founders have actually seen coming from our side. And that's something that they themselves may not be able to do. So through some mechanisms of diagnosis and clinics, etc., through interactions with area people, we are able to figure out what that one thing is. And once we know what that thing is, solutions is easier, and doing some pilots here and there to figure out what's the right way to take it forward becomes all the more kind of logically the next steps. So yeah, I think I'll just pause there. That is something that, and I think it comes back to what you were saying, Rahul, that the real value add now, given that knowledge and capital are almost commodities, is how the accelerator teams are able to work with startups and help them do an orbit change, move from the current level to the next level, do a mindset change, kind of do that validation, which suddenly makes them interesting for VCs.
True.
Or business in general. Yeah.
No, I absolutely agree with the two of you. So as Arnav, you said, community and having founders around to help you is incredibly helpful. And being able to help them zone out is incredible. And Chintan, I loved your idea on the other end, where going into the details and identifying what's wrong exactly and what should you double down is incredible. And I think both those resonate with me in the sense, I'll talk about accelerators and incubators and fundamentally cohorts as such, as opposed to pure play investments. And I think they're a great forcing function. So a time foundation with a certain pressure on your head. And I think it plays to the human psyche. We work well with deadlines. We work well with compressed timelines. We work well with guardrails around which to channel the energy in a lot of ways. And I think that's one of the flip sides of being an early stage founder, right? You've got to be a little crazy to do something big, but you also need guardrails to be able to channel that craziness into something that actually comes out. And which is where I personally feel like, for me, I think the two things as investors or accelerators that happen, that I found most useful for founders, one is the forcing function, putting them on a limit, getting them to a certain outcome, forcing them to think. So I sort of think of this as asking them the right questions at the right point of time over a period of time. So that I think is one thing we as investors or people at accelerators can truly help founders. And I think second is actually around mental health. So we talk about a lot of this at Antler. We've recently covered it. Everyone in the teams talked about their personal journey of going through therapy, and we've all been ex-founders. We've all had bad days. We've gone through that journey, and I think that's one of the strongest things we can add as someone who's helping them along. If you've been in the trenches yourself, I know you've talked about your startup, Chintan, I know you've been there as well. And when you're able to share that empathy and be there for that founder on the day when like life is a sucks today, it hurts, it's painful, it's annoying, I don't want to be able to do this. And Sun says, I feel yeah. And I think it's incredible to have. It's just that encouragement on that day when things are going down. And I truly think we underplay the human element of how important it is. I personally at least over-index as much as possible on it. As a firm, we're very strongly aligned to that as well, because you cannot have peak performance from an individual unless you're backing them as an individual more than anything else. So yeah, but super good. Forcing function, community, and being there for them. So I think the next question, and I think this is for everyone in the audience, I'm not sure how it works, but please add your questions to the chat box or one of these places. We can start weaving them in. And just one thing while we weave back and forth from the questions, what I'd love to hear is, how do you folks see this evolving? So Arnav, YC's come up with some interesting things today where you felt that something's changed in the market after almost, I think, 15 years with zero change. Chindan, you've been around since the days of Morpheus and now Morpheus 2.0 coming back. So where do you see it being headed as such? And would love to hear both your thoughts on this.
Yeah, I can go first. I mean, I think in terms of, I go back to the first point I made around, I think remote work has really changed. I think it's the biggest shift that we will see in our professional lives, which is where you can build a company from anywhere and everywhere you want. And I think that's going to be a great thing for India. And I think you already see it in the last couple of years where you see just more startups evolve. So my view of this is that actually they're going to be, because there are more startups now, there are more chances of success rates. I think peers around each other see their friends building companies and they realize, okay, well, my friend of mine built this company and I used to hang out with this guy. I can build a company too. And I think as a result, what you mentioned, actually, the inertia to build a startup has actually gone down. So I actually expect a lot more founders to emerge, and I actually expect the whole pool of capital to expand, but also the universe of founders to expand. Like one example of that would be, maybe like 15 years ago, I think even in the US, it was very common to have years of experience under you before you start a company, because the common wisdom was, how can you start a company if you're in your 20s? But today, actually, being in your 20s is a big advantage too, because one, you can take risks in your life. Two, you can maybe even move faster than people who are 1 or 2 generations above you. And three, you think from a first principles approach. So in a lot of ways, I think I see a lot of more founders coming, and I think there'll be a lot more founders that are younger. And I see that trend generally at YC, but also other venture firms who are willing to back very young first-time founders. And I think the most important characteristic, I think the three characteristics that I think in founders, and it's not a skill, I think it's more of a mindset, I think is, one is clarity of thought, two is speed of execution, and three is the ability to hire. And these are three personality traits. These are not skill sets you need to work at a big company or work at a startup. This a 15-year-old can have, this a 50-year-old can have. So I think anyone with that mindset can build a company today. And because it's much easier to start a company, I just expect more and more people to start companies much earlier and not join big companies.
Interesting. So largely more people coming into the ecosystem, coming in earlier into the ecosystem and choosing to build and rebel against the world rather than be yet another brick in the wall.
Yeah.
So what about you, Chintan? How do you see this evolving?
No, I think very similar. And specifically, I actually work a lot with entrepreneurs in tier 2, tier 3 cities. So within CICO, I actually head the regional piece there, and we do programs. In fact, most of our programs, or almost all of our programs, are not in the tier 1 cities. I mean, we hardly do any programs in a Delhi, Bangalore, Bombay, we would essentially do it in an Indore, Ahmedabad, Jaipur, Guwahati, Dehradun, Mohali, Chandigarh, etc. And that's where, especially also the fact that since the last 2 years, a large part of the accelerator program, and I think that's going to stay that way, have become virtual. Right? My sense is that even with things opening up, there is merit in doing, let's say, the networking sessions or investor interactions physically, but there's merit in doing a lot of other things virtually. So from both of these aspects, what I see as a big trend is the seeds of acceleration and the seeds of startup learning, how to do a startup, all these things that we have been just talking about, percolate down to tier 2, tier 3 cities. And a lot of talent resides there. That's what we have seen. And not only talent, a lot of interesting ideas. Because as we know, and that's one of the fundamental principles of starting a startup, that a startup solution is really a solution to a problem. And there are significantly large and fairly unique problems that you would encounter in a tier 2, tier 3 sort of an ecosystem, which may not be that pronounced in a large city or in an international kind of a scenario. So that's one trend that at least I am significantly bullish on, and we have seen happening in the last couple of years. And with more such programs happening in the tier 2, tier 3 cities, and more entrepreneurs in these regions getting an opportunity to test out their ideas or their solutions to problems, I think we're going to see some interesting startups emerge out of these geographies. Yeah.
Interesting. No, I personally completely agree with both of those trends, and I think they point in the fundamental direction of where this is headed. Right, more access, increased and lowered entry barriers, greater number of people being able to enter them, geography not being a constraint, and that allowing you to build for everything. So merging what both of you guys said, like this can allow someone sitting in say the outskirts of Bahadurgarh to be building a B2B SaaS software to be sold in Winnipeg. Who knows? And that's truly a possibility that has happened today in some ways. So I want to get to some of the questions here, right? So I'm going to paraphrase. We have one from Professor Satyendra Sharma, who is one of my professors at BIT. So thank you, sir. Glad to have you here. But so I think the question is more fundamental about why is the startup success rate so low? And I don't think he means to blame accelerators for it, but I think accelerators can do more for it. So I think maybe it'd be good to talk about like what exactly is a startup? Why do we think the success rate is low? Because setting up businesses is not every business fails. So why is the rate for startup success so low? Would love to dive a little bit from either one of you into first principles up. What is a startup? What should we be calling a startup in so many ways as well? And I guess that would in some ways explain the low success rate as such. Maybe also by how we define success.
Yeah, I'll slightly rephrase the question in a way. I think I don't think there's a low success rate of startups. I think there's a low success rate of big startups. I mean, the word startup in our mind, when you think about startup, like the natural nomenclature is you think of Flipkart, you think of Amazon, you think of Google. But, India has been a very entrepreneurial community for the longest time. We all have, there are 400 million WhatsApp users in the country, and a lot of them have WhatsApp business. They're selling small goods and services online. That in itself is a startup. Like Conquest today, what we're sitting here together on is a startup in itself. It is bringing together people, and it is not a software company like Amazon or Flipkart, but it is still a startup. So I'd say that in general, like my definition of a startup is more than just a software company. I think this is what Ritesh also mentioned earlier. Like you shouldn't constrain yourself to building a software company. I think yes, software success rates are low, and I think the reason for that is the startups are insanely hard. And I think the fact that it is low just shows how hard it is. I think if building a very big company, the success rate was high, then it's probably not hard enough. Building a startup from scratch requires just a ton of tenacity and the ability to hire. But in general, I think, the only time a startup fails is when the founders give up. You've seen this time and time again. And, this is not like a ding on founders giving up because it's hard. But generally, you see so many companies struggling for so many years, and then they pivot and they have the aha moment and they make it big. So the only time your startup really fails is when you actually give up. And even if you go on and do something else, I think you learn a lot. So, in my view, I would just rephrase the question, which is, I think every startup in a way is a success, but not all of them end up being $100 billion companies. And, that's the way just things are designed. And if it were that easy, then everyone would be a $100 billion company.
No, I love that. I love that viewpoint to this. Chintan?
No, yeah, I tend to agree with Arnav, and that's a very interesting perspective that we don't need to look at startups as something which becomes a unicorn or which is highly scalable tech sort of a company. Having said that, though I would like to just disagree a little bit that, and my definition of startup would be any organization that is trying to solve a customer problem. Right, in India, the traditional businesses, and that's where a lot of our understanding and a lot of our metrics come, are typically SMEs. Right, these are businesses which are almost like auto ancillary kind of businesses. They're ancillaries to these are the kind of businesses that you would typically see in an industrial estate traditionally, and these are all businesses which most of them would not be addressing a customer problem and trying to develop a product to solve that problem. They would essentially be supplying some component or some material or some sort of a value added material to an existing large company, and as long as they do their basics right, the quality, etc., working capital is fine, and most of these would get typically funded from through a bank, etc., rather than a VC. They would survive. So we tend to look at that survival rate. But the minute you look at a business which is trying to identify a gap and then trying to fill it in through a solution, and also going all the way to sort of serve the customer, right, rather than depending on an existing distribution network or an existing large company and sort of going through them. They may do that later from a scalability perspective. But the minute you do that, there's an uncertainty which comes in, right? Because now you're trying to understand the customer, you're trying to figure out the product market fit. And again, I completely agree with Arnav that it need not be a tech solution. It could even be someone selling, let's say, a copper bottle as a healthy alternative which doesn't leak, hopefully, to conferences, to corporate conferences or whatever, right? I mean, it's a fairly interesting startup. You're essentially trying to sell a new product, an innovative product, healthier, this, that, whatever. But because there's that customer uncertainty, there's a product market fit which needs to evolve. The pricing needs to figure out, the distribution network, etc., etc. It adds a certain layer of uncertainty there, and I think that's one of the reasons why the startup success is low. But again, I agree with Arnav that if you look at these businesses also and add it up with the tech businesses, it's not that low. The success rate is not. I mean, if you just look at unicorns as success rate, obviously it seems very low. But if we add some of these businesses also, then the success rate may not be that low.
True. I'm in both the camps in some ways. I think it has a lot to do with how you define the word startup, where at least the definition in my mind is something that has a 1% probability of working out, but if it works out, it will 100% change the way things are done. And when you start to evaluate a startup from that lens, it automatically, it just means right there that it's going to be incredibly low. It is not going to be possible to constantly have behavior change, consumer change. And a lot of this is also only theoretically possible because of shifts in certain things, like either underlying technology or generational behavior changes. And generational behavior changes don't happen so often as well. But coming back, so I think there are two questions that we have here. I think what Utkarsh is asking is there are now a lot of players in the ecosystem who are doing a lot of different things. How can accelerators particularly position themselves to add value? I would remove the positioning bit. Let's just focus on how accelerators can add value. I know we've covered a bunch of this where we covered what is most valuable for founders from accelerators, but if any quick thoughts from you folks, I'd love to do that. We'll have about 5 minutes left after that for the next question and then to wrap it up. I'm sorry, am I audible? Is this freezing?
No, we can
No,
hear
you're
you.
audible.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
Chintan, do you want to go first?
Sure. Yeah, I think Rahul, as you mentioned, we've kind of addressed a lot of these issues, but I would say that see one of the main sort of value adds for an accelerator, and I think that's what the question is, needs to be that it should be able to enable a startup to validate some of the key assumptions of the business model, right? Typically, I would assume that startups would, who would go into an accelerator would be folks who would have prototyped, who would have done some prototyping and got some validation from the customer, but they haven't figured out the business model part of it. I mean, how is this thing going to make money? How is it going to become scalable? How are we going to sell it? So some of those key elements need to be validated through the means of doing some experiments, some sprints, and those are things that an accelerator, I think, fundamentally should be doing. And of course, once that is done, once a startup is able to maybe attract capital, then of course it's a second, it's the next phase, that's a separate phase. But I think at an accelerator phase, it's important for a startup to validate some of these assumptions and present a business model through the means of a deck to an investor, right? Rather than simply presenting a product or a technology, it needs to be a more holistic sort of a pitch where product is one part, but you're also presenting the business model and you have put some thoughts behind it. Yeah.
Okay, and so you learn to also speak the language in some ways, as you
That's
say.
true. Yeah.
Understood. And Arnav,
Yeah, I think the biggest, in my view, the biggest value add of an accelerator is going back to my point, which is finding ways to channel the power of the peer network among founders. If you think about the accelerator business model, it is actually very unique compared to traditional venture models, because in accelerators, you are actually funding and inviting many founders. So you're actually doing venture at scale. And inherently, venture capital is actually not a scalable business model, but accelerators actually do it at scale. So it's almost like you're a part of a university where you have all these founders coming in. Some of them are first time, some of them are repeat entrepreneurs. But can you find ways to actually channel the power of that peer network? So for example, one of the things that I think works really well is running workshops and like almost like university style classes where you invite a founder who's done it before on a very specific tactical thing. That could be, for example, very specific around like, how do I allocate equity to my developers that I just hired? Like something very specific and small like that. Because I think as an accelerator, you have access to all of these founders. And I think if you somehow channel the energy and all of the learnings from people who've done it before and transfer it to the new cohort that's coming in, if you think about that mental model like a university, I think that is something accelerators can do that no other type of institution can.
no, fair. I completely agree with that bit. So, Utkarsh, there are a lot of people. There's everyone from independent angels to syndicates to alumni groups to college ecosystems that are created to pure play investors, etc. I think it's a bit of. I will answer your question as who should be looking at an accelerator rather than how should accelerators be positioning themselves, because the value proposition is pretty clear. And I think the person who should be looking at an accelerator is someone who's decided that the venture journey is actually truly hard. And each stage is a progressive stage of de-risking. De-risking in founders, de-risking the idea, de-risking the business model, de-risking the distribution, etc. And each one of these is uniquely solved by different things. Accelerators particularly solve for people risk. It helps you understand in a structured environment, because think of it like the transition period between building something and starting to build something, but sort of having guardrails around you. That's sort of the analogy I always draw. That's one. So that helps. And if you feel that that's something you require, then you should look for something like this. If you feel that you're super structured, you can keep yourself focused, you will not let your morale go down, especially given that you're trying to do something really hard, then maybe go at it by yourself. But the number one thing I've heard from all founders, the number one thing I've learned from my two startups is it's incredibly lonely. And it helps to have people be a part of that journey with you, especially when you're starting out, because it's the hardest and the loneliest at that point of time, and then a little before the IPO. But when that is what's happening, that and you look for peer group community, as Arnav said, you look for individuals around you, and if you want that, you should go to an accelerator. If you feel that is not how you thrive, if you feel that is not how it's going to work, perfectly fair, right? Every business does not need to be an accelerator. Sorry, every business does not need to be a startup, and every startup does not need to go to an accelerator as well. So I think it's a lot more about what the individual feels they need at that point of time. And thinking that through, I truly think is the hallmark of some of the best founders themselves. Rather than getting hung up on, oh, this is the money that is I'm going to get, this is the dilution I'll have, etc. Having people believe in your dream is invaluable. And if you can get the good set of the right set of people to back you with your dreams, I would definitely recommend someone try it out. But I think we have one question from Varad Manyar, and this is about how can something like Conquest, which is a virtual accelerator for people, Chintan, as you said, the trend is in the direction of virtual accelerators now. How do you feel that mentoring programs can be improved? What do you think can happen to help startups out in a virtual way as much as possible, given that the community aspect is a little difficult to replicate?
Yeah, so if I can just go there, yeah, I think something like what Conquest does in terms of providing access to virtual mentors. I think if they can structure their program a little bit, again, this is something that we have discussed, that as long as the mentorship happens with an objective of helping the startup identify some of their important risks, and then the next stage of mentoring, whatever, I'm assuming that if there are multiple mentoring sessions happening, the next stage of mentoring and the next few mentoring sessions are focused on helping the startup come up with some solutions, and then the mentor, or for that matter the Conquest team, could essentially work with the startups and help them do some of these pilots, sprints, etc. I mean, what I have seen not working out well is general mentoring, right? Where you have startups interact with. I mean, it's fine for maybe one session here and there with someone who's experienced, and it gives you some clarity. But from a programmatic perspective, I think it's important that the mentoring is really means to an end rather than an end in itself. The mentorship program is essentially there to help the startup identify their risks, figure out what the validation needs to be, and help them do some experiments or sprints or pilots on the ground, such that there is enough clarity and there is enough validation, and the startup is able to really move to the next level. So yeah, I think this is something that we have talked about earlier also. But as long as mentoring is looked at as a means of achieving this end, I think we should be fine. There should be enough value add for startups.
Perfect. Chintan, thank you for assigning homework to students now. This is going to be fun for them. And what about you, Arnav?
Yeah, I mean, I think in so many ways, Conquest is so much better positioned than most accelerators, because you have access to amazing BITS alumni and current college students. I mean, in so many ways, the university has produced some amazing founders over the years. So use that to your advantage, because you have that bond that no one else has, and you are capturing a much younger audience that has more time and is willing to take a lot more risk and is willing to learn much quicker. So use that to your advantage instead of trying to maybe replicating what other people have done. Like, what are one or two things that make you unique and give you that advantage? So I think mentorship programs around connecting, aspiring founders to founders who are maybe one step ahead, or even alumni who've done it before. And in so many ways, you can also think about making this more programmatic. I think one thing to also think through as you make a mentorship program more programmatic is like incentivizing people. You are connecting college students to alumni. Give the alumni who've done it before an opportunity to angel invest, like put skin in the game, because you can rely on voluntary opportunities, but if you really want to make something programmatic and really, really scale it up, you have to find the one or two things that incentivizes everyone to give back, because you'll always find I think a set of people who are always willing to give back, who are generous with their time. But the effect and the network effect becomes a lot more powerful when everyone has some skin in the game. So think through one or two things that make you a lot more unique, and think through one or two things that can incentivize more players and more people to participate in that ecosystem, such that you can actually make the network effect work at scale.
Interesting. Agreed. I'm just like, this is going to be so hard going last, because I'm like, what else have they not spoken about? But to take a shot at this, I think I would look at it on two levels. So one is fundamentally, again, what is mentorship meant to do? I divide it into two categories. One is what I call inspiration, which is where you get an amazing founders to come talk about their journeys, and all it serves as a purpose. And these are the general sessions, right? All it serves as a purpose is to inspire you to take the leap, to jump, to be there on your dark days, etc. Because inspiration is finite, motivation is finite. You need to keep replenishing it. The other bit I would look at with mentorship is very tactical help with mentorship. And I think to be able to tactically help people, two things need to be in place. And this is where Anu and covered it very well. One is proper incentive alignment. I think one problem that all accelerators, incubators, folks face is having a revolving door of mentors is a very bad idea. You should actually measure your churn rate for your mentors as well in some ways, as to how many of our mentors from last year participated in this year. Hold very, very high standards for those mentors as well. Feel free to kick them out. It's okay. If they're not adding value, feel free to tell them, hey, sorry, it looks like you can't make it. Thank you so much for your time. And then just like, don't talk to them. So figure out proper incentive alignment, as Arnav said, maybe allowing them to invest in companies, etc. But you can only do that if you have a deeper relationship with them, because doing that one-off becomes complicated as well. So I would say build something steady. Think of it as, okay, in 2 years, can we ensure that 80% of our mentors are retained, that they're here? And when you start from that, the secondary questions will start to come. How do we align their incentives? What do we do? Do we send them a chocolate box? Do we give them equity? And that is something that you folks should figure out. And then let some of it be handled by the startups themselves, but hold a very high bar, create accountability for the mentors themselves, create their incentives to do this, ensure that they don't churn out, because that's going to be incredibly problematic. And if you do these things, I think you'll be able to do a phenomenal job, because I think 99% of people in the world are unable to do this. So that would be my suggestion.
Yeah, I think Rahul, I think that the point you brought up, I think, is really important, which is, find high quality mentors and put founders at the center of everything. Like whatever is the most valuable to your founders, you should just do that. So if there are mentors or people, because as part of if you're part of a university program, sometimes it can be hard, right? Because you're reaching out to people a lot more experienced who might have, might not have as much time. But if someone is not adding value, no matter how high profile that person might be, you should find ways to provide the best quality programs for your founders. And I think if you just have that principle in mind, I think you're so well positioned to be one of the best accelerators more than anyone else, just because you are at a place like BITS and you have some amazing help and mentors around you.
Interesting. So I think we've wrapped up most of the questions, and I think we've covered a host of areas. Chintan, Arnav and I came up with a question each to kick the conversation off. Would love to hear if there's something we can answer that's been on your mind as such.
No, I think we've sort of covered a fair bit of ground, and really looked at some very, very important and interesting issues. And thanks a lot. I think the significant learning for me too. Especially like the framework that you gave, Rahul, towards the beginning. And I think that's really how the accelerator programs have evolved over those 3 phases. And I think that's again, to answer the earlier question for the Conquest folks, they need to really look at that. An accelerator is not that much about knowledge. It's not that much about capital. It's really about adding value to the founder, right, and helping sort of move to the next level, make his sort of lonely journeys slightly more kind of whatever, emotionally stable. I mean, those are some very, very important differentiators for accelerators now. Maybe things were different earlier. So I think that's a very, very important element. Yeah. Thanks.
Interesting. So before we wrap this up, I think just one thing I'd like to say, and this is mostly to the students as an alum in some ways. It's scary what you guys do, and I don't think I had any idea about any of this when I was on campus. And when I've been fortunate enough to see Conquest through the years, how it's grown, what's been built, and as Arnav said, Conquest is a startup in its own right, has birthed a fair number of unicorns by now. And it's incredible that it's completely student led from day one, in and out. And what you guys do is absolutely phenomenal. It's being recorded, so I'm not going to swear, but it's incredible what you guys pull off. Do this day in and day out, sitting in the middle of what I call bumfuck nowhere and building this out over the years. I think you truly embody what it means to be Bitsons, and we couldn't be prouder to be alums of an institution like this. So incredible stuff, guys. And Utkarsh, Dhruv, great stuff on this. You have a great team of folks with you on this bit who've been supporting you, who've been there with you. And I think the biggest identification of their support is the fact that they're sitting in and listening to us right now. Because as a Bitsin, I know how many classes I went to or how many guest lectures I actually showed up to. The answer is 0. So you guys are incredible, and thank you so much for having us all here as well. We have a couple of minutes, I know that, so in case anybody wants to speak up, pipe up, any question, anything that we here could help you folks out with, we're happy to take a shot at that. I'm reachable on Twitter and Gmail as well. I'll just enter my email ID here in case anybody wants to reach out. And yeah, that's it from my side, folks.
Yeah, and I'll just say a few words as well. I mean, I think what you're doing is so important for the ecosystem. I think more than anything, I think starting a company is incredibly lonely, but it isn't as hard as people think it is. I think it's all about a mentality at the end of the day. So the best way to start a company is to just start. And I think what you're doing in terms of bringing a community together and making it easier for people to actually understand how it all works is really important. So sometimes there's no hard ROI on how you can measure this, but what you're doing is really incredible and for the Indian ecosystem and the entrepreneurial ecosystem. So if I can ever help in any way, I'll share my email. Just let me know. And thanks so much for having me on this.
Oh, again, thanks for having me here. In fact, I've also shared my email, and I just realized my email has Oasis, which I think is or at least used to be the cultural festival of Bits. It still is, yeah. And we are located not too far. I'm in fact located in Jaipur, not too far from Pilani. It's also probably an Oasis. Pilani. Yeah, I would be happy to help and looking forward. Thanks a lot for having me here.
Super. Utkarsh, do you want to take over?
Thank you so much to all our panelists for an enlightening and fruitful discussion. We really enjoyed listening to your insights. This brings us to the end of the launch for Conquest 2022. We look forward to all the new ideas, perspective, wisdom, and learnings that are in store for everyone involved in this edition of Conquest.
We'd like to thank the faculty and staff of our esteemed university, BITS Pilani, and everyone that is a part of the Conquest family. Without them, none of this would have been possible. We strive to reach even greater heights with this edition, and we are confident that our startups, mentors, partners, and investors would make this conquest unforgettable. Let's work together and make a mark on the startup ecosystem. This is Akshit and Mala signing off from Team Conquest 2022. We hope you have a great evening.